So the newest video game film Uncharted has recently been released here in the UK, and I thought I'd let you all know what I thought because I recently got to watch the film in cinemas and I have some thoughts I'd like to get out about the movie overall. So the real question I'm sure you're wondering is, did I like the film? Well, I've been going back and forth on my opinion, but I would say for the large part this film was pretty enjoyable. And while it's not entirely accurate to the games, which I'll get to later on, the film itself is very enjoyable. So, the cast of this movie, as far as I'm aware, has been a little controversial, but I'm okay with it. Firstly, I do like Tom Holland's portrayal of a younger Nathan Drake. He fits the bill really well, and he's a likeable character in the movie. But despite that, I'm not really a huge fan of Mark Wahlberg as Sully. Now, don't get me wrong, he does a great job with what he's given, but I played a couple of the Uncharted games, and Wahlberg's Sully for me just acts out of character. Sophia was good as Chloe Frazer, and I can see the similarities between her and the game version of the character. Villain-wise, I really liked Antonio Banderas as the villain, even if he does get killed off in the second to third act. But despite that, I love the other villains in the film, even if they do seem a bit too cliché at times. Now, in terms of plot, I can tell the filmmakers really drew from Uncharted 4 specifically, that being the search for the lost pirate treasure, or Magellan's treasure, although I can actually see some inspiration from the third Uncharted film as well, with the plane in the sky, which I thought was some pretty fun action. And a big chunk of the action in the film, I should add, just feels like they ripped it from the games, which I don't have a problem with, but there could be a couple of people that don't like it, because it might throw up some issues with the continuity, because this film is apparently supposed to be set before the games, a couple years at least. So the film itself also contains some pretty good references to the games themselves. For example, the plane chase is pretty much a homage to Uncharted 3, and Nolan North, who voiced Drake in the games, makes a cameo, which I thought was pretty cool. And the opening stuff with Nathan and Sam seems to be a mix of Uncharted 3 with the breaking into a museum, but also Uncharted 4 as well, with the two being raised in the orphanage. Now, that's a problem for me, because if this movie is meant to be set years before the games, then they'd have to maintain the continuity from the other games. For example, the flashback we saw in Uncharted 3 with Nathan Drake meeting Victor Sullivan, which is apparently their first meeting in the games, but in the film they meet here, which it just confuses me. So maybe PlayStation Productions or whoever's been making this Uncharted film, maybe they're trying to create a different trilogy of Uncharted films that isn't set in the same continuity as the games. If they do that, that's perfectly fine. I mean, it could be like the Resident Evil films, where you've got the games and you've got the films and they're entirely separate. So it could be a situation like that, but again, I don't really know. So I've got some pros and cons I thought about the film, and I'm just going to list them off because they're somewhat self-explanatory. So the pros: action's top notch for the most part, the story holds up pretty well, the villains for the most part are great. Antonio Banderas, as I mentioned, is a pretty good villain for the time he has in the film. And the look of the movie itself, I should add, is also pretty decent. It does feel like an adventure film. More specifically, it feels like a modern take on Indiana Jones, which I don't have a problem with, because Nathan Drake is sort of a modern day version of Indiana Jones. But the cons, I only have three specific ones. The villains at times are a little predictable. Sully's character, I mentioned this earlier, it's not really accurate to the games at all. The continuity errors as well is a big problem for me, because I know a lot about the Uncharted lore and it's just a bit of a problem for me. But despite those problems that I actually had with the movie, I would say that Uncharted is very enjoyable, and I'd recommend it for those of you who just want an adventure film to see. If you're a hardcore fan of the games, you might have some issues with that, but I'm going to give Uncharted a 7 out of 10.